Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm so excited today to have author and speaker and fear overcomer, Mary Marantz. Thank you so much for taking the time to agree to be on the podcast.
Oh my gosh, Tony, thanks for having me. And fear overcomer, I like that. Like Dragon Slayer. I feel like I want to have a sword.
I felt that. Like, as I was reading your material, I was like, where's a brick wall so I can run through it? And I'm here for all of that. But before we jump into like the book stuff, I was doing some research and I was really curious. It says on your website that your secret talent is that you can do a Sean Connery impression.
Yes, I can. Can we do that?
Can we hear it?
Okay. All right. Are you ready for this? And everybody who's listening, Sean Connery is specifically quoted in the book along with a lot of other movie lines. And I do all of the accents and impressions. So here you go. You're best. Losers always whine about the best. I'm sure you're familiar with the etymology of your surname. Goodspeed, as in Godspeed. So you're welcome.
That's amazing. That's amazing. That's from The Rock, right?
Yes, it is. And in fact, our dog Goodspeed is named after Dr. Stanley Goodspeed.
That's awesome. So tell me, you've done a lot of things over your life. You went to Yale. You've written a couple of books now. You're speaking. How would you describe the calling that God has placed on your life?
Words, 100% words. Words and discernment. I think storyteller comes up a lot. That I was a photographer for 15 years, so that's an ongoing thread. I just did a fun IG Live with my friend Kendall Mariah, and she said lens or pen storyteller. And I love that. I love that so much. And Tony, I feel like it's been pretty clear through most of my life. I've known I wanted to write a book since I was 5 years old. I finally got around to it when I was 40. So that's another thing we'll probably talk about. But I always really, really dreamed of having the gift of song. I always pictured myself like singing from a stage. And I have been very heartbroken in my younger years to tell you I didn't get a bit of song, but God made up for it with like 10 extra heapings of words. And a really cool thing that he's also given me, which I don't know if we talk a lot about. It's not like one of the gifts we typically think of, but I've been calling it kind of the gift of translation, where not only is he giving me words, but he's given those words, and this is proof that this is a gift from a giver. I have no control over this. He's given those words the ability to kind of translate differently for different people. And so whether I'm speaking them from the stage or they're written in the book, I've been amazed when people will come up and go, oh, when you said this one part, it just like spoke to my heart. And I'm like, I don't think I said that, but the way that it kind of gets translated, they very much meet people where they are. So words.
Now, I'm always curious about the thread, right, of people's lives, because you grew up in rural West Virginia, and then you end up at Yale Law School, and then here you are today. How do you know when God is telling you it's time to pivot, and make a move, especially bold ones, right? Because this kind of leads into your book, Underestimated, and how that kind of lean into that idea about making those bold moves. In the book, you call them boulders, right? Like, how do we push that boulder up the hill?
Yeah. I love that you're using that word pivot, though. In particular, I always think of like the Ross Geller scene.
Sure.
Pivot. And so, yes, born and raised in a trailer in rural West Virginia, single wide trailer, like whatever stock photo you have of dilapidated trailer in Appalachia in your head, like that's pretty much it. Or you can go to thebookdirt.com, everybody listening, and the cover of my first book, Dirt, that is the actual trailer I grew up in.
Oh, wow.
Go on to Yale for law school. We could talk about that for years and the underdog complex that creates. And then just as I'm graduating, I end up turning down not one, but two 6-figure law firm offers in London and New York to start a photography business with my husband, Justin. And for me, Tony, a big part of that was my parents had sacrificed a lot so that their only daughter could have more. And a lot of times we think that more equals the safe, set, supposed to success path that we all sort of applaud. But for me, what became even more pressing was this urgency that I did not want to live a life of regret. And it was one of the first times when I felt this sort of inner bump in my spirit that I had to know and trust and recognize a vision over my life and where I was being called that only made sense to God and me and not to the outside world. Because I'm going to tell you, there were a lot of people, not a lot of people, but there was a handful of people in the hometown.
I can only imagine.
Who had opinions, Golden Girl's not so golden anymore, whatever. And that's how it's going to be when you set out to do something that is not what's expected of you, that's not what's expected of most people in the world, I promise you that there are going to be people who have opinions, and they're not going to understand it. They're not going to get it. They're not going to understand it when you begin to move. Stephen Pressfield actually calls that in The War of Art, resistance recruits allies. That resistance is kind of inner work, but it will recruit the people closest to you to say things like, oh, you've changed. I don't even recognize you anymore. And 0.9% of people in this world, is my working scientific theory, do not have the ability to see a thing until it is done. There's a 0.01% of the population. These are the visionaries, the coaches, the fishers of men. They can look at somebody and see both who they are and who they are becoming, where they are and where they are headed, as clear as if that version of that person is standing right in front of them today. But 99.9% of people will not understand it until you've already done the thing. And so in those moments, I kind of tell myself this script, which is, that's okay. You'll meet them later. So I knew in my gut I was being called somewhere else. I did not want to live a life of regret. I did not want to live a life where I was, sleeping under my desk and working 100 hours a week, which is how the firms were kind of advertising themselves to me. Who can sleep under their desk the most this week? We'll reimburse you when you have to cancel your vacation. I was like, if you think that's a selling point, we have a problem, And so my husband and I chose a life where I could either we could be away from each other with me working 100 hours a week, or we could build something together and bear witness to each other's lives. And so we chose that. We decided to leap and the net would appear, right? This is the first time I take this huge swing. And I get a lot in this book about the idea of like, we think the opposite of playing small is to always go big. But what I've learned over, the 20 plus years since then is that ironically and paradoxically, some of the most important work we will do to quit playing small is actually by starting small and becoming the thing that we see ourselves headed towards, right? Like becoming the author that I thought I would be. So I've pivoted from lawyer to photographer. Then we built that all the way up to the height of the pinnacle of our career. And I pivoted into being a full-time author, which to me felt like finally coming back after the long way around to the work I was created to do. And in every step of the way, you have to be willing to trust the vision you can see, but 99.9% of people do not.
I want to drill down a little bit on what you said about not living a life of regret, because it's not lost to me that you mentioned it twice. And as I was hearing you say that, I was thinking about some of the community we call the bold ones here on the podcast. And I was thinking about the bold ones, and I was thinking that a lot of people probably resonate with that, but they can't wrap their mind around how do you score that? Right. And so when you think about not living a life of regret, how do we create a scorecard or a system or something that maybe acts as like boundaries on the side of a road that bounces us back to the middle of we're like, I'm heading towards regret, and then it just kind of bumps us back to the middle. How do we do that well? Yeah.
So I'll start by saying there's two rules that I've sort of followed in my life, or two questions that I think through. And that is that if I ever find myself asking, what am I supposed to do? What's everyone else doing? I know that I am already on the wrong track for me. Certainly the most crowded one. Most people will look around and go, okay, what am I supposed to do? What's the step-by-step blueprint? And they'll follow that. This feeling of an urgency of not living with regret comes from a couple of sources. One, I did watch my parents live with a lot of regret.
Yeah.
They got married super young. They both come from hard stories. They got into a rush to have their own place. So they bought this trailer, which immediately began to disintegrate and drop in value. It's not really like a real estate investment, And my dad dreamed of going to college, but went to work in the woods when he was 12 instead. Both barely graduated high school. And so a lot of their choices have represented taking the hard way around. Listen, I'm not afraid of the hard way. The hard way is not always necessarily bad, but it feels like that fell more into the being our own worst enemy kind of category. So regret to me kind of brings us to this conversation. A lot of people have asked like, well, what do you mean by playing small? Like, how do we know? Is that just like doing things that seem small to the world? And 100% it is not. I think if you are answering the vision and the call on your life, and that just means serving the people in your house or your neighborhood or your church well, then that to me is some of the biggest work you can do. Playing small is when you are doing things because it keeps you hiding in plain sight. It's when you are doing things because you know that you're feeling that bump in your spirit every day to go do something big, to do this, work that's put on your life. And you keep putting it off because you're afraid of what other people will say, the criticism that would come. What if it's not any good? What if I'm disappointed? What if I get my heart broken? And another year goes by, the clock goes on ticking, and the world is worse for your absence. So for me, not living with regret is similar to the Irma Bombeck quote. Like when I get to heaven, I go, come sliding into heaven. I hope I can say to God, I don't have a single bit of talent left. I used everything you gave me.
Oh, that's beautifully stated.
Thank you.
One of the things that I hear as I listen to you talk is this incredible self-awareness, in the business world, we call it like the soft skills and and one of the things that we say around here a lot is that if you're not dedicated to your disciplines, you'll be destroyed by your distractions.
Yeah. Woo, that's good.
Thanks. And so I'm always curious when I listen to somebody who clearly has some handles on their mental health, their kind of spiritual walk. I mean, you're talking about nudges and all these things. What are some of your go-to drill down behaviors? What can we steal from you on a random Monday in April that would help us listen to that inner voice and keep us aware when we're playing small, when maybe we shouldn't be?
What's coming up for me as you ask that question is another quote from another person, which is Pearl Buck, who I lived in West Virginia. We would drive past her homestead all the time. It's a little sign that said the birthplace of Pearl S. Buck, Pulitzer Prize winner, Nobel Prize winner, wrote like 87 books. And I would see that sign at 5 years old and think, I feel like A, I'm going to be a writer. I don't even know if I knew the word author. And B, I'm going to do it in a way that brings honor to West Virginia. I feel like both of those things were spoken to me. And she has a quote that says, you will not always be motivated, so you must learn to be disciplined. And listen, from a woman who wrote 87 books, like she knew what she was talking about, right?
Yeah.
And so for me, it is that feeling of writing, for example, is not a motivation. Writing is not, the spirit has struck and, inspiration has struck and I will go dump all this down.
It's not whimsical, right?
It is relentless, butt in the chair, day after day, discipline, this thankless long haul. I say the ledge is long, lonely, dangerous work of putting in hours and days and weeks and months without a whole lot to show for it. And having that ability to still show up anyway, believing that the work itself guides the way and that the muscle memory and the putting in your reps is what's sort of building, even if you don't use any of those first round words, like it's paving the way to the words that you really use. So I would say the thing you need to do is that identity in many ways is an action verb. That's a noun, actually, but we'll go with it. Like we become a writer when we write. Yeah. We become a speaker when we speak. And so when I am writing a book, it's 9:30 to 11:30 every morning. The walk in the afternoon is an active part of creation. We could talk about that and the limbic brain and the prefrontal cortex. And then it's again 4:30 to 6:30. I have learned when I am my most productive, and that becomes sacred ground. No, even the bird outside my window gets told to shut up. Nothing interferes with that time. And I push through that and I push through that. And I would say the thing that keeps me getting back up off the floor when I feel like I can't do it anymore is I hold a picture of the avatars of people I know in real life who are the most target reader for this work. And I think about how their lives are going to be changed by that book. So it's discipline and purpose. And it's doing that in the most practical way of repetitive times every day, putting that, build the wall first, my friend Hannah Brencher says, meaning like do the work that's actually you're building first and then all of the maintenance stuff comes later. And it's when it gets tough, and it will, knowing the purpose that's going to keep you pushing through.
When you're in those creative zones, I would imagine it can be a difficult or different season to, be married to you. How do you guys do that
Send that question in?
I'm not allowed to say where I get, no, listen, I'm an entrepreneur too, right? And I'm a creative. So when I'm on deadline, right, I've got a book coming out in September. And so it's like, I feel that, right? Like my whole body changes when I'm writing something like that, especially when I'm super disciplined about that. And there are so many entrepreneurs who are listening who feel the way about their business like you did about your writing. Like I got to show up, I got to do the work, and that comes at a cost. And so I don't want to ignore the cost and kind of learn from you. How do we heal those seasons of extreme discipline, non-negotiation?
Gosh, 100%. All of that. I'll just co-sign that to begin with. It can be tough to be married. Thankfully, my husband is a creative. And so I was going to say to be married to a creative, but he is also one. So he
two creatives might be even more challenging, right? I always say in my marriage, my wife is the rock and I'm the wave. I can't imagine what would happen if we were both waves, right? Which I know plenty of people who do it well. In my head, it just doesn't work. Like the water just ends up drowning everybody. I don't know, right? Like
tsunami.
Right.
The storm surge.
Right.
Yeah, well, I would say that Justin is very much a rock personality, even though he is a creative. So, I say I'm like the high wire tightrope walker. I'm up and I'm down. And that's not how tightropes walk, but go with it. Oh.
I knew exactly what you were talking about in my head. So it's fine.
Good.
It's a great illustration.
Oh, good. And he's just sort of like the steady, like I'm up and down and he's pushing us forward. And somewhere between the two, we end up where we need to be. Here's the thing is, I write. The way that my current sort of rhythm of bringing books into the world goes is that I write for a year and, copy edit, and then I market for like 6 months. And so that only leaves like 6 months every 2 years where I'm not like actively consumed, right? So we have to find ways to be a human in the midst of giving, in many ways, this is like giving birth to something we're putting out into the world. And they say like the hardest part of giving birth is the transition stage, is the moment you most want to give up. But like we have to find these things that anchor us. So, having that breakfast together before I disappear to the second floor, taking a couple of walks throughout the day because I need to get outside and see sunlight and we can reconnect with one another there, making sure we're having those dinners at night, an active Sabbath once a week. I am not somebody who's naturally wired to believe that rest is valuable in and of itself inherently. Sure. That's something I've had to learn. And so I am tempted to go and go and go. But what we actually learn in this book is that rest is when the limbic brain is allowed to switch on, and it's where some of our most powerful innovation and conceptual blending and creation happen. And so all of that to say is we have to remember to take care of the houseplant that is Mary, the houseplant that is Tony. We need food, we need water, we need sunlight, we need kind words. And so I'm getting better at realizing, do I want to go fast or do I want to go far? And when I think about that math of every 2 years releasing a book, maybe I have 20 more books, maybe. And I feel like I have 100 books in me. So if I want to get as many of these books out into the world as I can, then I cannot become this hollow, burned out shell of myself or my marriage. I'm not going to sacrifice those things in the name of even doing work I'm passionately on fire to get out into the world. So it's like that perspective of legacy and longevity over, I'll just burn the candle a little longer just to get one more quick reward.
That's so good. Do I want to go fast or do I want to go far? That's write that down, folks. I love to read dedication pages.
Yes.
It's one of my favorite things to do. And
Nice.
I was so pleasantly surprised when I read your dedication page.
Okay.
I'm going to read it to the bold ones and then just ask you to drill down on it a little bit. You start with a quote from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. It says, "Beautiful people do not just happen." And then underneath it, you write, "Hard story people are my kind of people. Here's to the kind ones, the quiet ones, the ones so often overlooked. Pain, like progressively finer grits of sandpaper, has worn off your hard edges, making you a soft, safe place to land for others. But your muddy story also means you just can't believe someone like you will ever matter. For all those who have ever felt underestimated, first by the world, but even worse by yourself, these words are both a love letter to you and a field guide as we fight our way forward together. More than anything, as we begin, know this: a lifetime of being overlooked has now turned you into someone who sees."
Woo! Do you want to just read my whole audiobook? That would be really great. That was good.
That is such good writing. Tell me about that. Tell me about how, like the process of coming up with an avatar who sees from the softness. I mean, I was like, girl, you getting me? I was just starting on there like, this is a dedicate. Normally it's like to my dogs or something, right? Like, tell me about that.
Yeah, I think that part that's really hit a raw nerve for a lot of people. We've seen quite a few people tear up just at the dedication, is that a lifetime of being overlooked has turned you into someone who sees. Mm-hmm. And I have felt that my whole life. I don't know exactly what it is. I think it's probably some combination of introversion and a quieter voice and being a deeper thinker and really hating, cocktail party, surface level chit chat. It's like my seventh circle of hell right there. And also just like a kindness being mistaken for weakness or a humble spirit. And whatever it is, anytime there have been one of those scenarios where, let's say you get a group of people together and it's a 2-hour cocktail party to get to know like some of the speakers in the room or the the leaders who've been brought together. I am such a people watcher, and you will notice that the whole first hour, people are like, there's a scientific term where it means that the molecules evenly disperse. Like they're going like 1-to-1. They're just sort of like speed dating around the room. And then by the second hour, the cool kids have somehow figured out who the other cool kids are in the room, and they have all congregated together over here. There's like, C.S. Lewis talked about like circles within circles within circles. And they have already started to like self-sort off by themselves. And I wrote a post recently that said, don't set me at the cool kids table. The conversations are always the same. There's this like one-upmanship and this jockeying for position. They've practically worn their elbow patches off, rubbing elbows, always looking right over your shoulder to the next person coming up who might be more important. I said, instead, sit me in the corners, plant me like a wallflower, right? I promise you that's where some of the most interesting people in the room are. And so I deeply feel that pain of just like being uninvited, being overlooked. I had one teacher, I had many amazing teachers, but I had one teacher in high school say, if anybody is going to get out of our small town, it won't be you.
Wow.
And so I have known that feeling my whole life, Tony, and I've used it. I put it in my back pocket like jet fuel, like I'll show you. And so there's been, like 20 years of just trying to prove people wrong. And then I think the place that I've ultimately ended up, and this is a place that makes me really happy to be me, is that I now know that I will never make somebody feel the way that I've been made to feel. There's this idea of I wrote about looking both ways. Like we're all looking up at the people who have more followers, who are up ahead of us in the journey. If they would only see me, turn around and look at me, tap me on the forehead, tap me on the shoulder, tap to like that post, then I would have finally arrived. And yet if you followed up the chain, that person who won't give you the time of day is over here trying to get that person ahead of them to notice them. And so on up the chain. I'm guessing all the way to Oprah. I don't really know where it ends, but somebody is at the top. And the people who have felt that, and this is the golden rule, right? We treat others the way we would want to be treated, and the inverse. We refuse to treat others the way we have been treated, and it left a scar on our heart, is that we turn around and we're willing to look both ways. Because right now, believe it or not, as hard as it is to wrap your head around this, there are people looking at you like that right now. That if you would just turn around and see them, it would mean everything to them. So a lifetime of being overlooked turns us into people who see, because we would never want to make someone else feel the way that we felt.
Yeah. Yeah. We often call it an abundance mindset, right? Is it, can you pull somebody along with you? Can you open up the door for somebody who couldn't get it themselves? Yeah. And as I was listening to you talk, I was thinking about your book and that idea about there's always somebody in front of you. And I wonder if at the very top of this food chain past Oprah is not the personification of fear, right? You talk about this idea beautifully, and I wanted to make sure that I brought it up, but maybe that fear of irrelevance is what's leading the charge to popularity. Would you kind of give us some of your thoughts around fear? Yeah. Well, the thing that came up to me as you were saying that is in my second book, actually, Slow Growth Equals Strong Roots, I write about this idea of, we want to be seen, and that's not an inherently negative thing. That's actually wired right into us, this desire to be deeply seen and deeply known. And there's this little turn of phrase in that book that says to be seen is to be known, and to be known is to be loved. Like we know this in our bones. And so we, pull on this daisy chain until it's wilting in our hands. They love me not. They love me, they love me not. And it's this idea of we're constantly chasing something from humans that we were just never meant to get. We were always meant to be seen that way and known that way by God. And so when we think about God, as one of the first character traits we learn about him that's forward facing is that of creator. That's one of the very first things he does, right? And us being made in his image, we are also inherently creative, not in the painting or basket weaving sense, but in the ability to put something into the world and call it good. And if we think about what is the enemy of that, what is the opposite of that? If there was a force that, that darkness is the absence of light, apathy is the absence of love, then the absence of creativity would be the enemy of that, and that would be fear. Yeah. And so we think fear is speaking to us so uniquely. We, in our desire to be seen and known, we even think fear is doing that to us, that it knows all of our makeup, it knows all of our stories, it knows all of our actual talent levels, and it's giving us accurate feedback. We give that credit to fear. But if we actually start to break it down, fear is an inherently uncreative force. It is not tethered to muse or melody or the original force of all creation, short of being given these two gifts, the ability to throw its voice so it sounds like you, because if it sounded like Morgan Freeman, you could catch it every time. Sure. And the ability to shapeshift just when you get a handle on it. It's a slippery enemy, but not a creative one. So it's coming in the front doors, perfectionism, you get a handle on it, it sneaks in the side doors, overthinking. So it's a shapeshifter, and it can throw its voice. It's a chameleon, but other than that, it is not creative. It has to copy the true creatives in the world. So if we go all the way back thousands of years, we see fear using the same boring scripts then in the Bible that it's using now. I did a video on Instagram a couple years ago that's sort of the earliest seeds of this book. I said, it's all been done. It's all been done better. It's all been done by somebody the world actually cares about. I can't start until it's perfect. I can't start until I'm perfect. What if I start and the critics come? What if they say, who does she think she is? What if I fail and I prove all the people who said I'd never make it that they were right all along? What if I don't have the bandwidth? What if I can't stay consistent with it? What if there's a time in the future when there's more money, more time, more focus, more energy? Maybe I should just wait until then. What if my voice doesn't really matter? What if I don't really matter? What if it's already too late? And it's check, right? But the good news is
there's not too much more to fear's repertoire. Like I go through chapter by chapter, each of the masks it puts on: perfectionism, procrastination, people pleasing, imposter syndrome, overthinking, even a fear of success. But I did a post recently, Tony, where I said, tell me the fear that's holding you back the most, and I'll tell you what page it's on in this book. Because I wanted people to know it's so predictable and boring that it's already accounted for in these pages. And once you do that, fear just becomes kind of like the annoying toddler in the room. Starts to lose all its power.
Yeah, I actually have long held the belief that the enemy, right, if you prescribe to the thought of spiritual warfare, that there's an enemy out there in the world, that the enemy is not a creator, that only God can be the true creator. So the enemy, once you kind of get the realm of possibility, it generally kind of lands in a couple different camps, and outside of that, that's just really about it. Like
that's it.
It doesn't get any cuter than that, right? Like it's just that's the deal.
Yeah.
So
you know what? I was just going to say, I did a post really quick. I'll just add this. I did a post that was like, it essentially said something this was years ago. It said something to the effect of, another year going by and you're still saying the same excuses. As in parentheses, believe me, the people who love you most have already all heard them all. And that energy, it was much more articulate 3 years ago. I don't remember it right off the cuff, but that energy is the same energy here with fear, that if I can just get you to, like, aren't you that sick and tired feeling? Aren't you tired of hearing the same excuse come out of your mouth why now is not the best time to write that book or start that business or whatever? If I can get you as sick and tired of fear and its boring scripts, which I promise you are no more interesting or creative than the excuses coming out of your mouth, they're probably one and the same. If I can get you as tired of fear as you are of your own excuses, then the only way is forward. In Slow Growth, I talk about reaching this point of at last exhausted. We have run and run and run towards gold stars and achievements, believing that would finally make us feel enough. When you reach the point of at last exhausted, I guess nothing is ever going to make me feel like enough. No amount of external success. Now the good work can begin. It's the same thing with fear. Once you get so sick and tired of it, you're just bored of it. Now the good work can begin.
Speaking of good work, I would be remiss if I did not talk about the cover of this book and all the Easter eggs that you put on there.
Yes.
I'm going to encourage people to go check you out on Instagram, and we'll link to that in the show notes. So don't tell us what the Easter eggs are. I want people to go earn it. They got to earn it. If you want an Easter egg, you got to earn it. But I am interested in the process. I as a writer, I find that's such a juxtaposition, like a switch to like a visual creative outlet. How did you decide that you were going to hide a bunch of Easter eggs on the cover, and then how'd you talk your publisher into it?
Yeah, I think the Easter egg part came kind of, the visual, especially Easter egg, came kind of naturally with that photography background, you know?
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah. So, and if you look at the writing, so I'll show one Easter egg.
Yeah, one's great.
Right here, it's so subtle. I don't even know. Let's try together. And I don't know if this is too bright for you to even see it, but you can barely catch a hint of it right there. You can start to see some lines right there. There's actually a compass in really low opacity happening behind the big compass, the big gold, forward-facing compass.
The whole front page is actually a compass underneath the other compass, right?
That's
so
right.
There's an embossed compass kind of in the middle of all that.
Yeah. And so that represents that with my writing, there's always the thing behind the thing. And so you think it's just a funny reference to Jurassic Park, for example, but it's actually like got 12 different meanings when you start to break it apart. And so I write like that. I write with a lot of Easter eggs kind of hidden and a lot of sort of like wink and a nod to the reader. And yep, I am saying that a little tongue in cheek. And so what's fun is when I read the audiobook, I'm able to kind of emphasize some of those words so that you don't miss them. But so then it just kind of became a real natural thing for the cover, that there's going to be these visual representations of the compass is guiding the way, and a small shift to actually get you unstuck to move forward, and the red and under and whatever. I'm not going to tell them all the things, but it was sort of thinking about like everything is on purpose. When it comes to me, when it comes to the book, when it comes to anything that I put out, everything is on purpose.
Does your brain work that way naturally, or is that a muscle that you had to kind of strengthen? Or both?
Both. I think it's a both and. I think it's a natural thing, to the point that fear likes to tell me that's a weakness. Fear likes to tell me either it's too kitschy or gimmicky, or that's not how true serious thought leaders write, or no one's going to get it. They're going to miss it anyway. And it took a daily act of naming the fear, to shrink it back down to size and showing up and writing anyway to write this book 100% as Mary. I gave myself permission with this book more than any of the previous two to show up 100% as Mary and to allow whatever writing came up to come up. And so there are going to be plays on words, and there are going to be metaphors, and there are going to be full circle moments and references where chapter 12 closes a loop that was opened in chapter 1, what have you. And the people who get it are going to love me all the more. And the people who don't, we're never going to get it anyway. So why am I working so hard to get them to love me? So yeah. And then I think the more you do it, the more you see them, you know, you see them everywhere. Yeah.
One of the questions I wanted to ask you is about authenticity, because I noticed as I was stalking you on Instagram that you're very open with your emotions, right? That's just part of how you're wired.
Yeah.
How do you live in the tension of being an expert in fear and also being vulnerably emotionally open?
Yeah. So I did a post a couple days ago as we're recording this, we're one day from launch day. And I did a post. So this would be like 3 days from launch day. And let me tell you, it gets brutal. It gets brutal right about now. And we're working all the time. I'm not getting enough sleep. I woke up and cried my eyes out to my husband, Justin, of like, oh, what if all this is a waste of time? Which, by the way, Mary, is written in this book in chapter 6, Imposter Syndrome. What if all this is a waste of time? And so I at least did have that tool in my tool belt, but that doesn't mean that that fear never shows up. It doesn't mean that fear doesn't get a foothold sometimes. It doesn't mean that when you are just about to have the breakthrough, it's not going to ratchet it all the way up to 100, right? Like there is a certain knowing of like, hey, you really want to like watch your life get attacked? Write a book about how to take down fear. Like that is not for the faint of heart. That's not for the faint of heart. And so what's very important to me is to show that, it's both ends of the spectrum. It's very important to me to also like not hold back on saying, I turned this in the procrastination chapter. I turned this paper in college with 23 seconds left and I got 100 on it. Right. And I've been chasing that high every day of my life since, because I wanted to show both extremes. You can both be wildly, wildly successful and still have fear show up. You can be a person who's becoming an expert on how to take fear out and still fall prey. Right. And so I wanted people to know that you don't become immune. The goal is not to become fearless in the sense of an absence of fear. It's how do you name the fear, feel the fear, and do it anyway, move forward anyway. So I really appreciate you saying that about the emotions, because in chapter 12, which is criticism is an inside job, I talk about my inner critic who I've named Dear John. And one of his favorite things to be mad at me about is he thinks that the range of the full depth and range of my access to my emotions makes me seem hysterical and weak. And listen, in the grand scheme of things, people listening to that for the first time, I'm not like crying on Instagram every day. I'm not like unhinged on Instagram, right? But it's just that my critic wants to tell me that any kind of weakness will be my undoing. Any kind of vulnerability will be my undoing. That I should hold people at an arm's length like a Heisman pose, shiny as a stiff arm. When in reality, the reason that fear wants you to believe that is because when you allow people in, when you're vulnerable with them, it actually builds the kind of trust that will make them hear what you're saying and can change lives. There's a really beautiful passage from Donald Miller in Blue Like Jazz where he talks about the SWAT team shows up to save the hostages and they won't look at them and they won't go with them because they're wearing their masks. And finally, this one SWAT team member takes off his mask, takes off his helmet, and he goes and sits next to the hostages. And he gets close enough where they can know his face and where they can hear his voice. And only then do they trust him enough to go with him, to follow him to freedom, which is a very beautiful metaphor for faith.
Yeah.
So I would say that it is the journey of sharing emotions on the internet and, like having a balance of IQ and EQ and being okay with showing up with both. Because I got to tell you, the other side of being too intelligent has also been a problem in some people's eyes.
I'm sure.
So being able to show up as both really comes down to the work of this book of knowing yourself and what is my identity and what is the work I was put here to do and what am I willing to do despite what people might have to say about it. So that's a really big answer for why I cried once on the internet.
I loved it. I thought it was good. It's so good. And I think that there are leaders who need to hear that, because if we can't lead from both sides of our brain, so to speak, the IQ and the EQ, then we're not going to be holistic leaders. And Jesus models that for us, right? It's a great example. If he's the leadership model we're trying to base ourselves after, then we've got a really great example of vulnerability and courage. So that's really good. Okay, I have one more question for you, but before I ask it, I know that the bold ones are going to want to find you all over the interwebs. Where is the best place to learn all things Mary? Of course, we've referenced your Instagram about 1,000 times, so I'll definitely shoot a link to that in the show notes. But where else?
Yeah, I'm going to point them to two fun things I think your people in particular will enjoy. One of them is in Slow Growth Equals Strong Roots. I actually introduced the 5 achiever types, and they all carry over into Underestimated as to where the achiever types get stuck playing small and how they get tripped up and how they can keep moving forward. And so we have the performer who's always on their toes. They need to show themselves, but also for sure other people how far they have come. And so I'm the classic performer. We have the contortionist who's the classic people pleaser. They contort because it is easier than to be criticized. The masquerader does a very tricky sleight of hand where they push other people into the spotlight, but only so no one notices them slinking back into dark corners. Our our illusionist in the distance is our perfectionist who believes they can't begin until all the conditions to begin and they themselves are perfect. And our tightrope walker could care less who's clapping, but they need higher and higher death-defying feats to feel the same amount of good. And so if you go to achieverquiz.com or marymorantz.com/quiz, Marantz is how you spell my last name. Achieverquiz.com. The quiz takes like 2 minutes, 10 minutes if you overthink it. The questions are super light and easy. And then in true Mary form, we go super deep with the results. I'll tell you where you're getting tripped up playing small based on your type and how to move forward. So that's achieverquiz.com. And then if you go to namethefear.com, we have the whole entire first chapter up there that you can download and start reading today for free. Depending on when this airs or when any of the clips come out, if it's any time between now and the end of launch week, we also have the entire audiobook as a bonus when you go ahead and order. So it's kind of like getting 2 books for the price of one, and I read it, which is super fun with the Sean Connery impressions. Yeah, and that's namethefear.com. And then at Mary Marantz on Instagram, come tell me what achiever type you are.
I love that. So good. So many great resources out there. Thank you for being so generous.
Yeah.
Okay, last question I love to ask people is an advice question. I invite you to go back in time and give yourself one piece of advice, except I get to name the season of life that you're in.
Okay.
I want to take you back to your first day after Yale, right? And you're probably in the mix of trying really to decide what you're going to do. You're leaving one, you're making this huge pivot. Justin's in your life. You're doing all those things. If you could sit down knee to knee with that younger version of yourself, hold her hands and look her in the eye, what's the one thing that you're going to tell her about the journey she's going to go on?
The first most important thing that's coming up for me is there's a reason you don't know all the steps in the staircase. And this too is a gift. Because if you knew how beautiful it was going to get, you wouldn't believe it. But if you knew how hard it was also going to be, you would probably want to turn around and run. And the reason we are not told all the things that are going to happen is because the happening gradually over time, we are becoming the person who can stand in those shoes. We are becoming the person who's put in the reps, who's put in the time, who has built the good kind of calluses, the kind that allow us to do our work like a guitar player, not the kind that make us numb to other people. And that can only be developed over time. You can't rush it. You can't skip to the ending. You can't want to know how it all works out already, because if you got your way right now and you could write the entire story with a red pen edit of how you think it should go, you would miss out on all the best parts. There is a God who loves you, who has plans for you that are far, far bigger and better than you could ever wrap your mind around right now. So try to figure out how to enjoy it in the becoming, and ask yourself this question. Assume it all works out. Assume it all works out, and everything you're hoping for eventually comes true in one form or another. Assume it all works out. How would you prepare today as if you believed that was true? What would you do right now to get ready? And go do that work.
Mary,
buy Apple. Buy Apple stock.
Makes sense. Thank you. Thank you for being so generous with your time today. Thank you for your gift of words. Thank you for what you're doing to just keep pushing the kingdom forward, and just so excited to see what God does on this journey.
Thank you so much, Tony.